to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
You're listening to the Crypto Clothesline podcast, and I'm Amy Rose. This week we released 2 episodes. One is with Roman Light from the Yellow Vest movement in France, and the other is this episode with Mike Holt from the Yellow Vest movement in Australia. In this episode with Mike, we have a casual sit down on my couch. We drink a cup of tea, we have a couple of laughs, but we also talk about some pretty serious stuff with respect to the Australian government and the issues that the Australian people are facing with respect to what the Australian government is doing and how many of the actions that they are taking are unconstitutional and how many of the laws that currently exist may not be legal. We also talk about blockchain and cryptocurrency, which is something that the Crypto Clothesline is all about. And to listen to the interview with Roman Light from the Yellow Vest movement in France, please go to our website www.cryptoclothesline.com and you'll find a list of all our episodes there. And it should be pretty easy to find Roman's interview. Otherwise, if you're listening from one of our other platforms, you're likely to find Roman's interview there as well. So without further ado, let's have a listen to Mike Holt and his thoughts on the Yellow Vest movement. Mike Holt, thanks so much for joining us on the Crypto Clothesline today. We're sitting here in my office at my house, having a cup of tea and talking about the Yellow Vest movement in Australia. Mike, you're a Vietnam vet, you fought for the country and you continue to fight for the country, particularly with respect to the Yellow Vest movement, but you also have another few little projects going on to restore Australia. So can you tell us firstly, what is the Yellow Vest movement in Australia? Why was it created and how's it going at the moment?
Okay, well, a few weeks ago I watched a video put out by Roman Light, who was one of the spokesmen for the Yellow Vest movement in France, and I was particularly interested because he was talking about citizens-initiated referendums, or as they call it over there, referendums initiated by the citizens. RIC. So I got in touch with him through Facebook and we started talking. We realized there was a great synergy there, and I asked him if it was okay if I set up a Yellow Vest page in Australia, which I then called Yellow Vest Australia and Worldwide. At the same time, there were other people setting up Yellow Vest pages in Australia without any affiliation with France. And so I was a little bit worried about that. But at the end of the day, the Yellow Vest movement is not about any one particular person. And you can call me a leader all you like, but I'm not really a leader as I've been elected or I've been appointed by anybody. If I am inspiring people, and that is what you mean by leadership, then yes, I'm proud to wear that label. But the Yellow Vest movement is all about empowering people through citizens-initiated referendums to be responsible and take responsibility for their own lives in all aspects.
Roman mentioned in the interview that they want to change the way that the French government works or to remove them completely. Is that something that the Yellow Vest movement in Australia is working towards?
Well, that has been a goal of Advance Australia, the group that I founded, for a long, long time. So yes, I think we can all agree that the political party governments have failed us miserably. They haven't performed the way that we would expect them. They don't serve our needs. They ignore what we ask them to do. They haven't had a referendum for decades. Well, the last couple of referendums they had asking us if we would approve local councils, for instance, as a third tier of government, we voted a resounding no. So what did they do? The state governments, all appointed by the political parties, just created a corporate structure and made the local councils into local government, as they're named, although they're not really government. They're just a dictatorship, raising funds and doing things that we never asked them to do. They are not allowed to do things like collect rate, which is a tax on our land. They are not allowed to impose fines for parking. They're not allowed to impose licensing and fines on people who don't register their pets. And they're doing a whole range of unlawful things. And this is actually treason because it goes against the Constitution. So yes, the Yellow Vest movement shares exactly the same goals as Advance Australia. We want to get rid of the corporate government structure and bring in a government structure of the people, by the people, for the people, with citizens-initiated referendums as a way for the people to be involved in government and to have a say not only in amending our constitution, but also in legislation that will affect the community. So the synergy between the Yellow Vest movement in France and the Advance Australia movement here, and also now the Australian Yellow Vest, is very, very strong.
A lot of people, when you speak about the illegal practices of the government with respect to tax in particular, you mentioned it's illegal to charge for rates for our own land. A lot of people would get their knickers in a knot about that and also say that Australia is a great country. But looking at the Yellow Vest movement in Australia, it has grown to, in the Facebook group alone, there's around 5,000 members. Is that correct?
Actually, I had a discussion this morning with my business partner, and we have two projects that we're undertaking at the moment. One is My Will Letters, and the other one is I can't really talk too much about it at the moment, but you know about the bat signal, right? Well, we'll be doing something very similar to that to get the message out to people. And I won't tell you how yet, but obviously you can use your own imagination. We're in the middle of developing those two projects at the moment, and we're asking the listeners, if you haven't already done so, go to our mywillaustralia.com website, download your My Will letter, start collecting signatures on as many of those copies of those letters as you can. Now, what is that My Will letter? It will give us the opportunity to form a grand jury consisting of 15 Commonwealth public officials who have sworn an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in England, not the fake one on the Australia Act Constitution. So that's one of the projects. And the other thing that I talked to him about was, and this was the third thing on the list of things to do, is to bring in a voting app that can be downloaded onto your mobile devices or onto your computer based on the blockchain. Now, why is this such a good thing? Because the blockchain distributes the data so that no one group or organization can control the data. And that means that it's very, very secure. And of course, we have 128-bit security encryption. So when we base the voting app on that, you won't be able to crack it. Everybody knows it's almost impossible unless you get somebody's key to crack the blockchain. So this is why the blockchain to us is extremely important, because with a solidly backed encrypted voting app, we can then hold elections anytime, we can hold referendums anytime, we can hold polls anytime, and these referendums will be binding on the government. But it will be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So the blockchain is extremely important. Now, I've been talking to a professor over at the University of Sunshine Coast, and he's been showing me what he's developed. And there's another group down in the university in Sydney who have developed the actual engine based on the blockchain. So what we're going to do is we're going to marry those two technologies to create the voting app. We've done the groundwork, we know the design, it's all been done, and people don't understand the ramifications of this, because once we start doing this, it's not just that you will be able to have a say in government. It will affect every aspect of your life. Because imagine this, let's say we bring in citizens-initiated referendums, and we put up a referendum and people vote. Now, most people vote the same way that they've always voted because their parents voted for the same parties and everything. So people in Australia have got mentally lazy about politics. And yet life is politics. So we may make some early mistakes when people start voting on referendums. They may vote for what the majority don't really want or haven't thought about. But by George, I tell you what, they won't make too many mistakes because it will affect them personally. And therefore, they will start to think about the issues. So this is one of the byproducts of bringing in the blockchain technology that people may not have thought about. It's going to change the fundamental way we think about being governed, the fundamental way we live our lives, and ultimately it's going to affect the future of our country in wonderful ways that most people can't even imagine.
I saw a document recently with some of the principles of the Yellow Vest movement, and I would love to hear some of those principles that you have, because a lot of people unfortunately, because of the fake news, associate the Yellow Vest movement with a violent movement. And, a little bit because there's no leadership. That's what people hear. And it's the truth. There's no real leaders. People are thinking it's a little bit of a scramble. It's a little bit hectic. Can you tell us what the principles are?
Okay, before I get to the principles, at first the Yellow Vest movement in Australia was hectic. It was unformed and we had no guidance, no nothing. And then we saw the riots in St Kilda and the media immediately linked us to that. Well, we had nothing to do with that. That was led by another Australian group, the United Patriots Front or something, UPF, whose leaders actually were arrested in Bendigo for cutting off the head of a doll and convicted. So they're not the kind of people that are associated with the Yellow Vest movement. They had nothing to do with it. And as I said before, I've been working with Roman and I've been expanding my contacts throughout the Yellow Vest movement in Australia. And one chap called Philip J. Watt came to me and said, Mike, would you write up a set of guiding principles for the Yellow Vest movement? And so we developed between us, it wasn't just my work, and in fact he did the most of the groundwork. Philip did a fantastic job of coming up with 10 guiding principles. And we put these principles to the other Yellow Vest Facebook page admins and said, would you sign up to these? They all agreed. So basically now the Yellow Vests are all united on the same guiding principles. And they are, number 1, citizens-initiated referendums, which I've just covered. Number 2, honest government. We want to restore a free and informed and independent vote. We want to support independent community representatives in Parliament, and in fact we will have smaller government led by the community, not by political parties. The political parties will go. They're dinosaurs. They've had their day. We will abolish all preferential voting and the two-party preferred system, and instead we will bring in electronic voting where we don't have to have big bang elections. So this is a very scary topic for the parties, but this is the way things are going, and they can't stop it, Honest media. Well, we all know how dishonest the media has become. They tell us lies, bald-faced lies. They try and manipulate people's thinking. I've watched them on TV on things like that. It's just disgusting the way they attack Fraser Anning the other day, for instance. I met him the other day, and he went down to St Kilda. I met him after St Kilda. And he went down there because he went to support ordinary Australians. And this is the thing about Yellow Vest. We are not left or right or centre. We are just Australians trying to get our country back on track. So he went down to St Kilda expecting to just join in a community effort, and it was hijacked by the UPF. As a result, the media went crazy and started labelling him all sorts of names, and I watched him on TV, and they try and twist his words, and he just puts them right in their place, and they hate that. They keep on attacking him, but I know him now, and I tell you what, he's a strong man, and I have a lot of respect for him. We're going to bring in a single tax with no loopholes. Now, I've spoken about this before on my podcasts, and basically what it is a bank transfer tax. Probably will be around 1 or 2% tax on every bank transaction. So every time you go to the bank or you take money out or put money in, you pay, say, 2%, 2 cents on the dollar. That's not a lot of money. But the beauty of this is once you start doing this, all the corporations will have to do the same thing. And so we'll all be paying our fair rate of tax. That at the end of the 12-month period, any money left over in the coffers of the government is distributed to Australians as a dividend for the hard work we've done.
It's interesting that we talk about this in my house with my Constitution sitting up on the bookshelf looking at us as we speak. But I have read the Constitution over and over, and I do know that in section 164 they do talk about taxation. And one of the key and most... it's highlighted and annotated, and over I've referred to this point in the past actually, that laws imposing taxation must deal with one subject of taxation only. And that means that our current taxation system, which has a tax on, we've got GST, we've got land tax, we've got income tax, we've got property taxes, we've got all sorts of taxes, when in fact, if you go by constitutional law, which is the underlying fundamental foundation of the Australian laws, it says that you should only have one tax. So very, very interesting, Mike. But what's next up on our Yellow Vest principles?
So Australia could be extremely rich again as long as we control our own central bank. And so that's what we plan to do. That is actually explained on our Advance Australia website, advance-australia.com.au. We explain exactly how it can be done. And at the same time, we want to also establish local public banks owned by the community that invest all profits from money creation into social programs and community infrastructure. Can you imagine what that will do to Australia? So that's another thing that we want. The other things are individual freedom. We want to ensure that all legislation aligns with the Commonwealth of Australia Act 1901 and common law. The individual should and must have supreme authority over themselves while taking responsibility for their act. Now, under common law, the only time that you can fine people or take them to court is if you harm somebody else. And yet, what have we got here today? We're being accused and convicted of crimes like speeding. Well, there's something wrong with speeding. Obviously, we don't want people to speed, but there are other ways to combat speeding. We're being fined for and convicted before a trial for parking in the wrong place or for parking too long.
Or for parking back the front on the wrong side of the road.
They're just legislation that the political parties and their lackeys, the local councils, are brought in to raise revenue. It's that simple. So we will generate individual freedom and national freedom. We will cancel Australia's membership of the UN and all treaties, and then we will renegotiate any treaties that will benefit Australia on our terms. And if we don't like their terms, we'll tell them to get stuffed. The Constitution, we will restore the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1901 and reinstate the true Commonwealth of Australia Parliament, consisting of Australians elected to serve the people. We will limit terms, and there will be no massive pensions at the end of their job. They will just be genuine Australians who want to care for their communities and serve our communities. And the final one of the 10 points will be to institute a Bill of Rights. Now, we actually are covered by the British Bill of Rights, 1688, but it's so old and it's not part of our Constitution. So we want to evolve that Bill of Rights to cover the rights of Australians in today's modern age.
The Bill of Rights that you mentioned, I found that really difficult to translate, and it's a little bit like the old King James Bible, really, and you can just make it into whatever you want, some of the references in there. So I think it'd be good for you to create something a little more up to date.
What we are undertaking is a very serious reorganisation of our nation and our national identity and the way we operate as a nation. It's a big job, but it's got to be done because we can't go on the same way that we've been going on all of these years. We keep on re-electing the same drongos who go in there and do exactly the same thing. They make big promises, which they don't keep, and they've run our country into the ground. They're selling off our land. They've forced the manufacturing industries offshore. Our farmers are dying, and they're not getting the help from the federal government that they should be. But actually, we'd prefer to see a situation where the farmers are self-sufficient and able to take care of themselves. The Yellow Vest movement is all about putting the power into the hands of the people to decide our own fate.
So, Mike, something else that we talked to Roman about in the interview was that a lot of the communication for the Yellow Vest movement occurs on Facebook, which is a highly centralised, manipulative and controlling platform for communication. And I'm really worried that Facebook is going to just start removing groups, start censoring the search query Yellow Vests, and which will put a massive hindrance on the development of the Yellow Vests. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that the Yellow Vest movement in Australia is moving towards to remove Facebook from the equation?
Yes, and that's a very good question, because there's actually a group in Canada has already created a social media platform called synthesissocial.ca. It's a terrible name. I'm going to ask them to change it, but it's based on the blockchain. So it's all distributed. There is no censorship like the Facebook does. Well, basically, when you get on there and you register it, it looks like Facebook. Yes, that's a very good platform. Now, what about Australia? Well, that's another project that Advance Australia is working on right now to buy our share in that. And we will have an Australian version, which will be linked to our voting app as well. So, the way things are going, we're going to have a very strong system in place so that the political parties and the vested interests cannot get their hands on it.
Well, thank you so much, Mike Holt, for joining me today on the Crypto Clothesline podcast and for supporting the interview that we had earlier with Roman Light talking about the Yellow Vest movement in France. So all the best. We look forward to following what happens with the Yellow Vest movements across the world.
Thank you.
Crypto Clothesline.